best, Gitu Yuwat. Welcome to Africa 54. Here's what's coming up.
Israelis mark the first anniversary of the October 7, 2023 terrorist attacks perpetrated by Hamas as the United States laments the Palestinian civilian deaths caused by the ensuing war. With just weeks to go before Election Day, presidential candidates Kamala Harris and Donald Trump campaigned for votes in Arizona, a crucial battleground in the race for the White House. And the World Health Organization says Lesotho has the highest suicide rate in the world. We'll have a report. All this and much more coming up on today's Africa 54.
We begin in the Middle East, where a residential building in the suburbs of Haifa, Israel, suffered significant damage on Tuesday after more than 100 projectiles were launched on the port city and the upper and lower Galilee regions within an hour. The vast majority of the rockets were intercepted by Israeli air defenses, but that damage was sustained in Kiryat Yam, north of Haifa, according to Israel's Home Front Command. Local media says it was the largest barrage targeting the area since Israel and Lebanon-based Hezbollah started exchanging cross-border fire. Monday marked the first anniversary of the October 7, 2023 cross-border terrorist attacks that Hamas perpetrated on Israel. While reaffirming its staunch support for Israel, the United States is lamenting the Palestinian civilian deaths caused by the ensuing war. VOA's Veronica Balderas Iglesias has the story.
As Israel intensified its air and ground offensive against Hamas militant targets in the Gaza Strip, Israeli mourners marked the anniversary of the terrorist attack that Hamas launched in southern Israel on October 7, 2023. About 1,200 people were killed and 250 were kidnapped. Hamas is still holding about 100 of them captive. During a ceremony led by Rabbi Aaron Alexander, U.S. President Joe Biden and First Lady Jill Biden lit a candle in the White House in remembrance of the victims. Vice President Kamala Harris and the second gentleman, Doug Emhoff, marked the October 7th anniversary by planting a memorial tree on the grounds of their official residence.
We must reunite the hostages held in Gaza with their families. And I will never stop fighting for the release of all the hostages, including the American citizens, living and deceased.
U.S. Senators Lindsey Graham and Richard Blumenthal expressed U.S. support of Israel Monday as they met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
It was the worst attack on the Jewish people since the Holocaust, but unlike the Holocaust, we fight back. And we're fighting like lions with the support of the American government.
Even with mandated civilian evacuations, Israel's military campaign has left nearly 42,000 Palestinians dead and more than 97,000 wounded, according to the Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry, which does not distinguish between combatants and civilians in its count. State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller acknowledged the civilian suffering on both sides during Monday's briefing with reporters.
The United States mourns the death of every innocent who died on October 7th and in the year since. And we are determined to continue to work for a ceasefire agreement that brings the hostages home, alleviates the suffering of the Israeli and Palestinian people, and ultimately brings an end to this war.
Israel, however, has widened its war to include Hezbollah targets in Lebanon. The Iranian-backed militia had recently intensified its retaliatory attacks for the war in Gaza. Peace in the region, at least in the short term, will probably continue to be elusive, analysts say.
Absent the return of all the hostages, it's hard to see this Israeli government, or frankly any Israeli government, agreeing to a ceasefire.
Relatives of the hostages still held captive by Hamas also commemorated the October 7th attack. During a ceremony in Tel Aviv, they repeated their demands that Israel negotiate the hostages' release. But analyst Cohen is skeptical Netanyahu's government will change its approach anytime soon. Veronica Valderas Iglesias, VOA News, Washington.
1 year after the war triggered by the Hamas attack on Israel, clashes between Hezbollah and Israel along Lebanon's border with Israel are intensifying. This conflict is sparking a new humanitarian crisis that the United Nations says has displaced about 200,000 people. Elizabeth Chernoff narrates this report by Etel Bonnet, who has been traveling in South Lebanon.
After a year of cross-border violence, villages near the border in southern Lebanon have turned into ghost towns, while safer locations have seen their populations double with families fleeing the conflict. The 200 residents of Kafir Sin in Nabateeh, southern Lebanon, are now hosting 500 displaced families. Fatima Rommel and her family have found refuge here, but the uncertainty surrounding the conflict keeps them ready to move again at any moment.
We were more at peace when we first came here, believing we would be back home in a month or two. But being far away for almost 12 months, it's hard. We miss it very much and want to go back home soon.
Other displaced families, like Mahmoud Mawasi's, have sought shelter in schools the Lebanese government has converted into refugee reception centers, like this one in the southern city of Tyre. Their home in the border town of Aitarun was destroyed in an Israeli airstrike, and he says their situation is bleak.
We received food parcels, but no financial support from the government. We feel neglected. In the 2006 war, the state was more present.
The humanitarian crisis has stretched Lebanon's government, which has been bankrupt since 2020, to its limits. Local workers say international aid has fallen short.
In the past year, the 7,000 registered families have received food parcels and hygiene kits only 4 times, even though they were supposed to receive them once a month.
The latest border flare-up has now entered its second year, with the risk of escalating into a full-scale war in Lebanon. What are now safe havens for families could become the next place the people must flee. For Etel Bonnet in southern Lebanon, Elizabeth Chernoff, VOA News.
A short time ago, the White House announced that President Joe Biden is postponing his planned trip to Germany and Angola this week to work on preparations for Hurricane Milton in the state of Florida and relief efforts after Hurricane Helene. He was scheduled to go to Germany on Thursday and then arrive in Angola on Sunday. Hurricane Milton is expected to hit Florida tomorrow. With just weeks to go before Election Day, Arizona is one of the crucial battlegrounds in the 2024 U.S. presidential race. Both Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump know that winning the southwestern state is key to their path to the White House. VOA's immigration reporter Elaine Barrows traveled to the state to ask voters how immigration is influencing their decision in this election.
Vice President Kamala Harris made her first trip to the U.S.-Mexico border as the Democratic presidential nominee late last month. She walked along a section of a wall built in Douglas, Arizona, during Barack Obama's presidency. Later, at a campaign rally in Douglas, Harris said the country must police its border, but she also called for a better way to welcome immigrants legally.
And so we must reform our immigration system to ensure that it works in an orderly way, that it is humane, and that it makes our country stronger.
Some Arizonans say immigration is the reason they're voting for former President Donald Trump, who has promised to be tougher on illegal immigration.
I have no problem with legal immigration, not at all.
But Jane DeGrazia says those who cross illegally don't belong in the U.S.
And it's very unfair to our country. It's dangerous.
There are over 4.1 million registered voters in Arizona. About 35% are registered as Republicans, while just over 29% are registered as Democrats. Around 34% of voters fall into the other category, which includes independents and those not aligned with the major parties.
So the independent share of the voter pool in Arizona is really growing.
Kimball is the chairman of the Citizens Clean Elections Commission in Tucson, Arizona. and he's registered as an independent voter. He says immigration is not everyone's top issue.
Republicans are far more likely to say the major issue is immigration. Democrats are far more likely to say the major issue is abortion. Independents are more likely to say abortion, but not by an overwhelming amount.
Arizona is the only battleground state that borders Mexico, and one that dealt with a record number of migrant arrivals in 2023. On the day Harris visited the border, Trump, campaigning in Michigan, again promised to close the border.
We will begin the largest deportation operation in American history, and we have no choice but to go.
But this young voter says he would like to see an immigration system that didn't keep families apart for so long.
It's heartbreaking to see, families be split up.
Daniel Gutierrez says his father is a Trump supporter, while his mother says she will vote for Harris.
So I hear it from both sides.
And for the upcoming presidential election, Gutierrez decided to vote for.
I'm decided with the Democratic Party.
While some Arizonans know who they will vote for in November, others are more focused on simply getting more people to the polls. Joseph Garcia is executive director of the Get Out the Vote group, Si Se Vota.
Whatever the issues may be, we want them to be informed voters.
And these voters could help decide who wins the White House on November 5th. Aline Barros, VOA News, Arizona.
4 candidates are vying for Mozambique's presidency. Some are pledging to rid the country of alleged widespread corruption and improve its economy, while others say they will end the long-running insurgency in the northern province of Cabo Delgado that has driven out about 1 million people since 2017. As VOA Nairobi Bureau Chief Mariama Diallo reports from Maputo, some Mozambicans say they are more interested in a better life than who wins the elections this week.
The same Frelimo party has ruled Mozambique in southern Africa since its 1975 independence from Portugal. Some say the country is doing just fine, including 69-year-old Argentina Bebe, who told VOA she's too old for change and wants continuity in presidential and legislative elections slated for Wednesday.
I'm not interested in change. I already know the people, but I prefer to continue the improvement of Mozambique.
Others, like 28-year-old Ernesto Cremildo Castigo, who works at a butcher shop, says he'll vote for change.
Mainly due to corruption, so that Mozambique can develop, so that society can feel more at ease, in terms of justice, in terms of education, in terms of public transportation.
Aslak Ora, researcher at the Christian Michelson Institute in Norway, has been doing research on Mozambique for 25 years. He says corruption does affect the daily lives of ordinary people.
You have the everyday corruption where people meet civil services and they have to, pay little bribes in order to get their services out of the state or municipal institutions that they relate to, and that complicates things a bit.
4 candidates are vying for the presidency, including Daniel Chapo, the choice for the ruling Frelimo party. At a recent rally, the 47-year-old former radio presenter told supporters that peace and security for his country will be a top priority.
Because without peace, without security, there is no development. As I said here, we have our brothers who are suffering from terrorist attacks in Cabo Delgado.
The government has been battling an insurgency in the gas and oil-rich Cabo Delgado province, where about 4,000 people have reportedly been killed and about 1 million displaced since 2017, affecting multi-billion-dollar oil and gas projects. Meanwhile, analysts say that one of Frelimo's biggest accomplishments has been ending years of its brutal war with the Mozambican National Resistance Movement, or RENAMO. RENAMO has since become one of the main opposition parties that came in second in the last presidential election. After the death of longtime leader Afonso Dhlakama in 2018, Its newest leader, Osufo Mamad, accuses the Frelimo party of having no proposals to solve ordinary people's problems.
Vote for you have to have jobs tomorrow so we have good access roads. Did you hear me right? Your land is a rich area. You are poor. It's through Frelimo's poor governance.
The other two candidates include Lutero Simango, a 64-year-old and leader of the Mozambique Democratic Movement, and 50-year-old Venancio Mondlane, an independent who used to belong to the Renamo party and seems popular among the youth. The National Electoral Commission met with international observers Friday to explain the voting system and answer their questions. The Commission chairperson, Carlos Simao Matsine, said that all voting materials should be in place by Monday, and voting is expected to take place across the country, including in Cabo Delgado. 17.1 million people have registered to vote, 3 million more than the number was at the last election in 2019. Mariama Diallo, VOA News, Maputo, Mozambique.
Still to come, we'll tell you what country has the world's highest suicide rate. Stay with us.
On the next Straight Talk Africa, the United States presidential election is less than a month away, and members of the African diaspora are voicing their concerns and hopes for the next president. Join me, Yeheyes Wuhib, for a special edition of Straight Talk Africa, focusing on African voices on the race for the White House.
In other news, Tunisian President Kais Saied has won re-election in a landslide victory after a campaign that saw his opponents jailed, along with journalists, activists and attorneys. The North African country's election authority says Saied won just over 90% of the vote, and turnout was low after many of his critics chose to boycott the vote. And in Malawi, the United Nations World Food Programme is working to address a rising number of malnourished children amid an ongoing drought, the worst to hit Southern Africa in decades. The WFP's efforts including providing supplementary feeding for children in health facilities and distributing emergency food items to affected households. Lesotho, a country in Southern Africa with just over 2 million people, has the world's highest suicide rate. The World Health Organization says 87 per every 100,000 people in Lesotho commit suicide every year. This alarming figure is more than double that of Guyana in South America, which has the second highest suicide rate in the world. Tuso Kumalo has more.
As you enter Lesotho through the Maseru border post, the scene in the Mountain Kingdom, also popularly known as the Kingdom in the Sky, quickly turns lively. The hive of activity in the capital city of Maseru, with its people going on with their daily errands, shows no signs of an emotionally wounded nation. It's until you talk to the citizens that you start realizing why the suicide rate in this country is 10 times higher than the global average.
I tracked some of the victims who have succumbed to this. And this trek led me to the home of Malapo. Her daughter, Likwena, was not very lucky.
The 62-year-old says it was at 11 p.m. when she received a message that her daughter Likwena had drank poison. It was too late to save her.
So I went again to try to take her to hospital. But there was no help because she was already gone. When we arrived at Sebo, they said she's gone.
My next stop was at Kubetswana Township, just outside Maseru. Here I met Ntati Pakwe. The 39-year-old mother of 2 has made 5 suicide attempts. Luckily, she has survived to tell her story.
I couldn't address whatever was going on in my head. I couldn't handle either the pain of whatever may have happened or the disappointment that I'd caused myself. And when the cutting, it felt like punishment, like I'm punishing myself.
Talking to ordinary folks on the streets, you start getting an understanding why this is happening. In 2002, the World Population Review report pegged gender-based violence at 86%. 2023 saw those living below the poverty line totaling nearly 50% of the population, while unemployment is expected to reach 18% by the end of 2024.
If you are not employed and you are not getting enough support from the same family, you might think the option would be getting rid of yourself because you think you are a failure.
And experts say these socio-economic challenges trigger mental health complications that end up leading to suicide thoughts.
Those can be mainly associated with issues of poverty, unemployment, inability to also, deal with day-to-day life challenges that most of the time we encounter.
Meanwhile, people in Lesotho are doing their best to cushion themselves economically, selling whatever ways they can find to put food on the table, hoping that help will arrive soon to rescue them from this suicide scourge.
On its part, the government says it is already tackling the problem of mental health in schools and public gatherings, as well as crafting a treatment policy. But experts say as long as the triple challenges of poverty, inequality, and unemployment are not resolved, incidents of mental health are likely to get worse, forcing many to turn to suicide as an escape route. Thuso Khumalo for VOA News, Maseru, Lesotho.
It's time for our health report, and joining us now is Jackson Vunganyi with the latest on HIV, AIDS and mental health. Hello, Jackson.
Hello, Esther. Thursday is World Mental Health Day, and we want to bring your attention to the often overlooked link between HIV, AIDS and mental health struggles, including the alarming rates of suicide in African countries. And joining me now is Brian Ahimbisibwe, the Global Youth Ambassador with the Elizabeth Glaser Pediatric AIDS Foundation. Brian is HIV positive and part of the first generation of young people who went on to live with HIV and not die from it. Today, however, he finds that many of those young people who have lived with the virus all their lives are dealing with social stigma, struggling to find love and to find jobs. Hello, Brian. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hello, Jackson.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. It's a pleasure.
So talk to me about some of the mental and emotional challenges faced by young people living with HIV/AIDS in Uganda and parts of Africa.
Young people growing up with HIV face several mental health challenges, including but not limited to suicide, which is the most common, rejection, self-doubt, and not being able to cope up with the communities within they live in, but also school dropout. I mean, I was in and out of school because of the mental challenges that I faced growing up amidst all the support that I had from the area psychosocial support clubs. So I imagine how much more the other young people growing up without this much support have to go through.
Absolutely. Why do you think this connection between HIV, AIDS, and mental health is often overlooked or not even discussed at all?
The HIV care and treatment programs in Africa are primarily about clinical treatment outcomes, and more often we do not give attention to the psychosocial support and mental health lens. And this predominantly is what we live in. I mean, I only have a few minutes or hours at the clinic, but back home I have all the time to myself. And this is when the reality of mental health draws in, and I'm wondering, should I take this medication? Should I not? How long will I take it? The community around me is stigmatizing me. I have self-stigma within myself. And so why it's not something that has been given priority, and why it needs to be, is that in that time is when I actually decide on whether to continue with this treatment or not. And in a way, it contributes to even the better treatment outcomes that the clinical arm intends to address.
What are some of the misconceptions or harmful stereotypes about living with HIV that contribute to this stigma?
Oh, I could spend the whole day talking about them, but one, stereotypes like you gonna live to a certain age, and beyond that age you will die.
There's a ceiling on how long you live.
Yes, on how long you live. The most common is you won't have a family. I mean, I'm married, I have children and I'm married to HIV negative partner. My daughter is HIV negative, and I'm imagining why all these stereotypes like the medicine, the antiretroviral therapy that we take is toxic or damages a part of our body system, or like so many challenges that attribute to this.
Why do you think these stereotypes still exist up to now? I mean, it's been over 30 years or 40 years since HIV/AIDS was discovered in Uganda. And I remember in the early days, the stigma obviously was one of the major issues that was stopping people from even interacting with people living with HIV/AIDS. Why has it been so persistent?
From a personal experience, growing up in the system and now being able to implement some of these programs, the one thing that stands out for me is treatment literacy. Like the communities, the world within the HIV treatment programs is aware of this, but the world within the outside community still is in the blankets of information gaps. There's still a lot of community sensitization that's needed to let people know that the world has evolved, especially the world of HIV, with innovation and better treatment outcomes, like maintaining your viral load undetectable, being able not to transmit it, which is one of the things that I front the best, alongside mental health and psychosocial support, and many others. So the biggest contribution to this for me is the treatment literacy. To imagine, and because it has evolved, the world imagines that everyone is aware of these HIV treatment innovations that have come up, but it's not. And so sensitization and getting the communities within or outside the HIV programs get to know of this would address it.
Creating more awareness.
Yeah, sure.
Brian, thank you so much for sharing your inspirational story. Thank you so much for joining us here today on Africa 54.
Thank you too, Jackson.
That was Brian Ahimbisibwe, a young man from Uganda living with HIV/AIDS, telling us about his story and the connection between HIV